Let's just say, for an example, like a random person, they're trying to improve their health, they go hire like a registered dietitian. And among like a myriad of variables that registered dietitian tells them to do to improve their health from a nutritional perspective, let's just say she says, oh, like do something as good as just eat more grass-fed beef. So that's good on the surface.
Or eat whole grains, right? It might be the first mistake that they even go to the registered dietitian in the first place, depending on that dietitian's training.
Yeah, so the reason I didn't mention that is because like very few people would argue, like grass-fed beef is probably overall like slightly nutritionally superior to grain-fed beef, for example. But
Yes.
I just mentioned something as obvious as that because few people are gonna, I guess, deny the difference, contrast between like a grain-fed or grain-finished rather and grass-finished beef.
Yeah.
But just getting back to that, let's just say, okay, so she says go buy grass-fed beef. And the average person, they're gonna take this information and they're gonna go to the grocery store. They're gonna see that grass-fed label. Remember, they're trying to improve their health. They're trying to maximize their health from a nutritional perspective, and they're gonna just trust that label and buy that beef. And this happens across pretty much every single category of food group that you'll run into pretty much in the U.S. So this person goes to the grocery store, they see that grass-fed beef, they see that label, and they purchase it. But let's kind of dive into what actually goes into that claim and how deceiving it's become, and how difficult it's actually become to source actually legitimate, like for instance, 100% grass-fed beef in the U.S. So I guess for the listeners, just a quick background: like all cattle are grass-fed. So all cattle spend about like 80% of their life on pasture, eating like forage and grass, which is their species-specific diet.
Even the CAFO?
Yeah,
beef?
so basically here's how it works. So they spend 80% of their life out on pasture, eating a species-specific diet. So they're a herbivore, so they're meant to be eating grass, for example. And that helps maximize the nutritional profile of the meat. But then probably I would say 98 to 99% of the cattle are then sent to a feedlot on the last few months of their life where they're fed predominantly nothing but grain, probably like genetically modified corn and soy. So once again, that label isn't lying to you. It is grass-fed, but then they leave out the part where it's grain-finished. So once again, the person is trusting this label. They're thinking that's, and of course the pictures always show like an open pasture, et cetera, et cetera. And they're trusting this label. They're buying the product, thinking they're buying a nutritionally superior product, but most of the time it's not. So most of the time, once again, it's sent to a feedlot where they're fed heavy amounts of grain. This does change the nutritional profile of the meat, so it typically ruins the natural omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Typically, omega-6 would be a lot higher than the omega-3 in the meat versus when it is finished on grain. And
why is that so important for people that don't know? Because I mean, we've discussed it not in too much depth, but what is the ratio that's really required for optimal health with the omega-3 and 6?
Yeah, so you typically want like a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, like 1 omega-3 to 1 omega-6, for example.
Got it.
And in grain-finished beef, you typically get like 1-to-10 or 1-to-8. So you get 8 or 10 omega-6 for 1 omega-3. Where, for example, like the place I volunteered and learned about grass-fed beef production, 5-bar beef, they did a meat analysis on it. And there you'll typically find a ratio of like 1.7 to 2 omega-3 to 1 omega-6. So dramatically different ratio compared to the grain-finished beef. So the reason for that, the reason for the importance of that is if your listeners look up the inflammation theory of disease, they'll see obviously that like 99% of disease arises from chronic inflammation, which happens from poor dietary choices, but on top of that, poor lifestyle choices. Long hours of work, maybe even overtraining, for example, would cause a spike in inflammation as well. But it all adds up.
Also emotional, like, chronic fatigue or chronic stress, all these things.
Yeah,
there's
like
a myriad
relationship
of things
issues, financial issues, et cetera, et cetera. But
spiritual growth.
yeah, but every single, I would say predominantly the large portion of Americans are facing all of those issues. So obviously inflammation is through the roof.
Yeah.
And dietary choices play a big part in increasing that inflammation as well.
You just rocked my world because I've explored so many things about the controlled animal feeding operations. I didn't know that all cattle were essentially started on grass. But since we're on this topic of beef, there's so many terms that are thrown around.
Yeah.
In your book, which
Yep.
we'll link in our show notes today, you go deep into this. But can you explore for us that we don't know the organic, the free range, the pastured, the all natural? There's so many things that confuse people when it comes to beef. I mean, I can't think of a more really argued about topic than beef. I mean, we had Rob Wolf on the show, and he wrote Sacred Cow with Diana Rogers, and he really unpacked a lot of truth there. But what's been your research, and what's been that path of learning for you when it comes to all these confusing terms around beef?
Yeah, so that's just kind of scratching the surface, the grass-fed claim. So sometimes
Yeah.
a lot of people will be like, well, Eugene, don't worry about it because my beef it says grass-fed and grass-finished. But typically what a rancher could easily do, and remember, there's no on-site inspection for any grass-fed claims. So you simply fill out some paperwork, you say you're grass-fed, no one checks anything, and they just take your word for it. That's actually the level of auditing that goes on in the U.S. beef market.
Wow.
So let's just say you have grass-fed and grass-finished beef on your label. Okay, so that's great. I could actually feed the cattle grass for about 8 months of their life, 8 to 10 months of their life, feed them grain for like 4 to 5 months to fatten them up quite a bit because it's a pound per pound industry, finish them on grass for about a week or so, and still label it grass-fed and grass-finished. And I'm actually not lying to you. It really is grass-fed and it is grass-finished, but I just kind of I didn't include that part where it's like grain-fed in the middle, which happens very, very often. And obviously the general consumer is so far detached from the farming lifestyle, it's not even something on the radar for them to ask for.
Most people just buy whatever beef is the cheapest. I mean, let's be honest. I don't know the percentages, maybe you know, but I'm guessing it's the 90% of Americans that just buy the cheapest possible beef.
No, that's true. And my book is more for people that actually want to make consciously better food choices. But the whole point of the book is just to show them, like, even for the person that is consciously trying to make the best decisions, how difficult it's become. Because imagine, like, I even run into a lot of people in the holistic circles, that are actually trying to optimize their health physically and mentally. And you still see them running into these mistakes like constantly, once again, buying this product, trusting the label or trusting the claims in some sort, and then just buying those products for years and years on end, thinking they're getting the maximum nutritional profile in that food group when they're just like simply not. A lot of times too, it's like sometimes you'll see 100% grass-fed. Okay, like I could just, first of all, not even finish them on grass, just finish them on grain, because once again, no one's going to check. And in a competitive market, a lot of these ranchers, remember, they have international competition as well as local competition now, because actually 90% of the beef sold in the U.S. is sold from overseas.
I noticed that, and y'all check it in Trader Joe's. It's from like Australia and different companies where maybe there's one vat of 100% grass-fed organic beef, but it's from like 5 different countries. If you look on the back at Trader Joe's.
Yeah, exactly. And and to make that confusing, sometimes it even says like product of the USA.
Exactly.
And so here's the thing with product of the USA label claims. I can buy carcasses from Mexico, import it into California, cut it up and process it into packaging here in California. Well, not here. Now we're in Texas, but in California. And then that I can legally claim as product of the USA.
That's just
because it's
mind-blowing.
Processed actually in the USA. It didn't used to be this way, I think like 5 to 8 years ago, but then obviously these meat packers changed the laws, and now that's just how it is. So
I'm dumbfounded because one thing I want to explore with you is the other animals, right? Like the eggs and the chicken and things like that. But since we're on beef, like it's so incredibly high in nutrients, the right kind of beef, the organic beef. But what does that even mean anymore? Organic beef, that's organic, free range. What are these terms? What's the real truth about these terms now?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I used to do like grocery store tours very often, teaching people about food production practices. And I do get a lot of like mothers, for example, like, oh, but I buy the organic brand. It clearly says USDA organic.
Yes.
So what organic basically means for the most part is like a factory farmed operation where they feed them nothing but organic grains. And that's like literally the only difference between just a factory farmed operation, where on the other hand, they would just feed them genetically modified corn and soy, which is bad for a myriad of reasons too. We can get into that also.
Yes.